It's a pleasure to announce Amy as a guest speaker, but it's also difficult because her list of achievements is so substantial that I would end up talking for far too long. Most of us know Amy as the race director for the Seven Sisters Trail Race and the Vermont 100 Ultra, but maybe not everyone knows what an accomplished athlete that she is. When she was in college, she competed in cross-country skiing, and her best season was finishing third overall collegiate nationals, helping her team win a national title. After that, her focus shifted to running, and she became a successful ultra runner. She has 3 times represented the USA at World Trail Championships, and her best finish was in 2013, where she was top American and 15th female. Amy finished the Boston Marathon 14 times, and in 2018, she became the US snowshoe national champion at the marathon distance. Now, if you think that running is hard, running a marathon is hard, try running a snowshoe marathon. I mean, even if a 5K in snowshoes makes me want to cry. I was actually there that day in Woodford, watching her run that marathon and crush it in super difficult conditions. Besides race directing and working as a full-time environmental engineer, Amy has also been coaching for 18 years, working with high school and college running and cross-country ski teams, and she was named Coach of the Year 3 times. She started coaching for ultra and trail runners in 2014, and that's what she still does. And now I have talked too long, so over to Amy.
Awesome. Thanks. That's me. That sounds intimidating. It's hard to realize all the things that I've done. Awesome. Well, it's funny, when I got asked to speak, nobody gave me a topic, right? And I kept I actually poked a bunch of people that are here today to try and narrow it down, because I wear several different hats in the running community or whatever. And ultimately, the themes that kept coming across were I'm a runner, I'm a coach, I'm a race director. And so what I thought I'd do, and hopefully this is interesting, what I thought I'd do is just kind of boil it down to, if I had 3 nuggets for each of those hats that I wear, what they might be. There will obviously be stories, because a lot of these lessons were hard learned on my part. So I guess that's what I thought I'd regale you with. But I welcome you to grab a beer, because that's how I do things, and I'll tell you some stories for a little bit. So I'm hoping I can share a screen. Let's see if this works. Maybe. There we go. Look at that. Did that work? Only kind of. Are you guys seeing that? Yes? Okay. Cool. So Lori told you all about who I am, so I don't even have to explain this. But like I said, I just thought I'd kind of talk about the trials over miles, or the miles of trials that I've had, the lessons that I've learned over many, 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 many miles. So, as a runner, I think one of the most important things that I've learned, at times I've made decisions based on what you think you're supposed to do. You become a runner and everyone asks, when are you going to run Boston Marathon? You become an ultra runner and people ask, when are you going to do 100 miles? Things like that. And it took me a little bit to understand that where I was going to have the most fun was, follow your inspiration. And that might not necessarily be the races that you're going to be best at, but it's going to be the races that it's going to inspire you on days like today to actually get out and get the miles in, right? Because you've got something, exciting that you're working up to. So for me, I've run Mount Washington many times. I don't consider myself a strong mountain runner. but it's such a challenge to be able to, you know, like David, I know David's done it. I don't know who else here has run up Mount Washington before, but there's something about being like, I ran up the highest peak in the Northeast in one go, you know, like that's a really cool thing. It's intimidating, but again, like that's the sort of thing that will get me out on a, you know, a day like today, which my husband and I have labeled craptastic. That's the weather today. So that's what gets you out on a craptastic day, to put in the miles that you can have these adventures over the summer. You know, and I kind of say that same thing with 100 miles, where I've never really had the perfect 100 mile. There's always been some sort of breakdown along the way, whether I'm, you know, puking. I've got a stomach that does not want to run 100 miles. So sometimes there's some puking, sometimes there's, you know, some mental breakdowns, there's tears shed, that sort of thing. But partly what inspires me is like that brass ring of having the perfect 100 mile, the perfect race. And again, like that's what keeps me training. That's what gets me out there at 5 a.m. when I need to get mileage in, is, you know, that dream of the perfect race, which, you know, to me, that's what's inspires me. So that's a photo of me finishing the Cascade Crest 100 there, which, you know, was one where I ran great through like mile 90, and I walked the last 10 miles, even though it was downhill and then flat, because I ran out of energy. And I was being paced by the woman who like a month prior had just won Western State. So I remember just apologizing to her over and over. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so slow. You didn't sign up for this. I'm so sorry. But again, like, you know, maybe one of these days I'm going to get that perfect 100-mile finish. Here's hoping, right? So the second thing with running is like, you know, none of us are, I don't know, I guess I can't speak for anyone else, but like, certainly I'm not making a living running. This is something that I do on the side. So there's no reason to take this so seriously. I think there's a time to be focused, but there's also a lot of time to just have fun. And so, you know, I love my tutu photos. Kristen made that tutu for me. That was at the Hot Chocolate Run, where I told people if I could fundraise $1,000 that I would wear whatever they wanted me to wear in the race. And so ultimately this is what I wore. True story is that I actually tripped right out of the starting line and went ass over tea kettle. And so when you do that and you're wearing a tutu, everyone really knows who you are. So it happens though. But then, you know, the other photo there, I've become quite well known for drinking a beer during my races, because you can do that when you're ultra running and you're out there for hours. So I was there, you know, toasting a bunch of the volunteers along the Cascade Crest 100 there. So again, like, don't take it so seriously. I'm glad, and I probably had a better race at Cascade Crest, taking that moment to celebrate with the volunteers, to have a light moment and not just be, you know, focused forward the whole time. And one of the biggest running lessons that I think took me a while was just accepting that failure is an option. You know, I'm someone who, if left to my own devices, it would be very easy to be held back by fear of failure. And that would mean I wouldn't try new things. I wouldn't get to experience some of the great things that I've gotten to experience. So that top photo there, I was running the Zion 100, which is the first time that I ever tried to run a 100-miler without any crew, without any pacer, with no support other than the aid stations along the way. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I didn't finish the race. And I remember that being really hard in the moment. I stopped running at mile 81, and, you know, I kept trying to explain to my friends afterwards how you could feel like a failure when you ran 81 miles. And it was one of those hard moments, but it's also like my goal was to run 100 that day and I didn't reach it. And it's just like, if you run 20 miles, that's a long way to go. But if you were trying to finish Boston and you stopped at mile 20, you didn't achieve your goal. And there's that failure, fear of failure, or feeling of failure that goes along with that. That being said, that failure helped me. I keep that in the back of my mind at times when I want to quit during other races. And so I think, just failure is sometimes part of this process. And it's important to know that, failure sometimes happens, or I keep saying failure and it's not the worst thing. It's just like, you don't always achieve your A goal, and that's okay. And sometimes you don't reach the finish line, and that's okay. The bottom photo is, I think that was the third time that I was on a US team, but I'll say my first time getting on a US team for the World Trail Championships, I really didn't feel like I was good enough to be selected for the team. And so I put myself out there, understanding that there was a high probability that I wasn't going to achieve this thing that I wanted to achieve. And yet I put myself out there, and ultimately I was selected. Again, like, I think sometimes, high risk, high reward. And this was one where it paid off, where Zion 100 was one where, ultimately I didn't reach the finish line. Ultimately I didn't achieve what I wanted to, but sometimes if you reach high, you can get there. So I think it's okay to have audacious goals, or to dream big and then go after it, I guess. So I guess those are my three biggest running lessons from over the years. Coaching lessons. So again, I've been coaching, as Lori said, I've been coaching for years, and now I work one-on-one with athletes, but I also I help out at the Hampshire College running program as well. One of the biggest fundamentals that I think we all need to do when you're looking at putting together a training plan, or just coming up with your goals or whatever, is being honest with yourself, and being really honest with yourself. And for some people, that can, rather than just writing this training plan that maybe has you running 50 miles a week, it has you running 7 days a week. If that's not realistic, given your balance of life and family and kids and all of that, you're not going to succeed, and you're setting yourself up from failure before you've even started. So it's important to understand what's a realistic balance of training. It's good to understand if you're someone who has, say, a triathlon background, and you want to be able to incorporate some biking in there, like, be honest about that, and then it can get programmed in, rather than trying to fight against it and say, no, I'm only going to run. Then you're going to miss the biking, you're going to miss the swimming. For me, I wouldn't say I don't like running alone, but I will say, if I'm honest with myself, I have an inner lazy person. Like, I am the laziest runner you've ever met. If left to my own devices, I know, I saw Patrick's face. If left to my own devices. And so I have to fight against that. I know myself enough to know that if I don't have plans to meet with someone for a run, that lazy person is going to get the better of me. And I'm going to stay on the couch. I'm going to eat as if I ran that day. But I'm not going to get out. And so that's one of the keys of training for me, is making sure that I have plans so that I hold myself accountable, because I need that. So this photo here is the photo on the left is me running with a couple of my friends. Again, setting myself up for success by having friends out there with me. On the right, it's not only running with friends, but it's also, when I started ultra running, I didn't know what I was doing. And I started with my friend Nick, who also didn't know what he was doing. So we were the blind leading the blind. We read Ultra Marathon Man, thought we learned everything from Dean Karnassi's, crazy tales. But I was fortunate pretty early on to meet Donna Utakis, and obviously she's a legend, but she also had so much knowledge. And so, for the first couple of years of ultra running, I basically, did everything I could to run with her as often as possible and just suck knowledge out of her. So I knew what I didn't know and figured out who did know it so that I could run with them. And I'll say, back in that day, that was when, Dave Martula was also training up for his first 100 at Vermont 100, and Jeff Hansen. And so there's a lot of familiar faces in there. We all kind of trained together for a year leading up to our first 100-mile experience. which was awesome. The next thing I think of, or the advice that I give to athletes in general is consistency is so important. I almost think of it like smart investment strategy. And I get that that's not the best analogy. And trust me, when I try and have this conversation with college kids, they like scratch their head. But if you think about it, like if you want to build up a big nest egg, it's going to be easier to put like, $1 a day away rather than having to part with $100, every 3 days or whatever, so these little consistent efforts over time build up to so much more, and you don't even realize sometimes you don't realize the growth, or you don't realize what you're doing, rather than say a weekend warrior approach. So a couple of great examples that I like to highlight with that. In the upper right, this is a photo of Will Draxler, who I wrote about in The Sun, but he was a high school kid who ran 100 milers last year. Or 100 miles of his own design. It was his, senior project at the Academy of Charlemont to run 100. And he and I had kind of been talking over the 2 years leading up to that about what he should be doing. So again, he was kind of the student of the sport, much like I looked up to Donna. He looked up to me to gain some information, but he also he put in the time and effort over 2 years to slowly build things up. So this was, myself and Will, and in the middle is Mark Rabasco, and we're pacing him into the finish of his 100-mile effort, which he did. And then the lower corner is this couple that I've been working with for several years, and they're proudly showing off their Boston Marathon medals for this year. This is Julie and Michael. Julie's someone that I ran against in high school, ran against in college, and then we kind of didn't see each other for a while, and then she's come back into my life, and these are the sorts of people who are going to always be kind of battling with cutoffs. And so we just had to work over time, as long as she got in the consistent mileage and we got in like one little speed effort every single week. I've been training with them for like 6 months leading up to them being able to finish their Boston Marathon. So that was a huge moment for them. So my last kind of coaching lesson is, I feel like we all kind of, in general, as we're thinking about running, we focus a lot on the legs, right? We focus on the training that we have to do. We focus on the strength, and the legs are only one piece of the overall puzzle that you need to have in order to be successful at running. The things that, I guess, the photos kind of show it a little bit, but, one photo, that's my husband mowing down, shall we say, at an aid station table. But, fueling, especially as you get up into the marathon and longer distance, the fueling that you take in as you're running ends up being a real important part of the puzzle. Not a puzzle that I've successfully figured out, clearly, because, I still haven't figured that out for the 100, but, fueling and hydration and stuff like that can certainly take away from all of your hard training if you don't get it right on race day. So that's what that's showing. The other photo here, I guess it was the best photo that I could come up with for mental toughness. The photo here was a race that I did. It was a 6-hour race several years ago. And you can tell in that photo, I kind of look miserable. It was basically a day like today, only raining more. And I was out there running for 6 hours through like a foot of snow. Most people quit after about one loop, which it was I think 3.5 mile loop. And it took the entire field basically an hour to like pack down and kind of mush our way through that first lap. The laps got faster once everyone had packed it down. But I was one of the rare people that made it through the 6 hours of running. But that's the mental toughness that you need to be successful, even, no matter what distance you're doing. I can't tell you how many times I've been running a 5K, and at some point it starts to hurt, and you've got that inner dialogue of, do I keep pushing? Do I back off? Like, gosh, how much faster am I really going to be if I keep pushing? If I back off, what's the big deal? Because God, that freaking hurts. It's that constant battle in our head. And so I just think the mental training aspect is so important, and important to practice, and important to be, to recognize that internal battle is going to happen, and that it's something that you got to be aware of. So that's my coaching lessons, I guess. Race directing. I know we've got a couple of RDs here. And I can only see so many people on the screen, so I'm forgetting, but I know the Raffenspergers with the Green River, and Patrick has his rate, Toby, and the 9K for K9, I think. And there's, yes, a couple others. So the first thing that I learned when it came to race directing was just learning from other people. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. I'm an unapologetic plagiarizer, if we want to call it that. Every time I go to a race, if somebody else does something good or they do something cool, I steal that for my race. Yeah, and I'm hoping other people do that too. One of the things that I've been, I guess, a little bit, I call it on the leading edge of, although it's a little bit of a misnomer to say that, is the Athletes with Disabilities division that I have at all of my races, but that started at Vermont 100. So there's a photo there of me guide running at Vermont 100. And that was the case of, I was the first one to do this, or the Vermont 100 was the first one to do this at an ultra or a trail race ever, like anywhere. But I didn't just start from scratch with it. There were already Boston Marathon, California International Marathon, Chicago Marathon. There were other races that had really strong Athletes with Disabilities divisions. So rather than starting from scratch, I took the rules that they had for their races, and then I started to adapt it to make it work for the trail and ultra scene. What's happened from there is any other I think the Yeti 100 down in Virginia has a great Athletes with Disabilities division. For the longest time, if you looked carefully, it at least had one reference to Vermont 100 still in their text, because they stole from what I had, and I welcome that. Please, I want these things to go everywhere. So I welcome people to steal from me, much as I have, stolen these ideas and adapted them from others. The other photo there is just, it's me at the finish line of the Macedon 100, but literally I crossed the finish line, and the gentleman there with me, Kevin Sayers, he's the race director, and he's someone who mentored me when I took on the Vermont 100. And I had a couple other RDs who also were really good mentors and really good, just people to touch base with in general. And Kevin and I have stayed in touch. And I think it's important to have a good network. I know I've reached out to Tom with a couple of questions at times to just say, I just want to pick your brain about something, because there's no reason that I have to do this in a bubble. There's, it just makes sense to, see if I can gain some insight or knowledge from him, and, vice versa. I know he's reached out to me and asked some questions as well. Like, that's the biggest thing we can do, is just learning from others. This, by the way, is I just finished a 100-mile race that took me 25 hours, and Kevin's giving me advice on the finish line there. So might not have been the most receptive to advice at that time, but the intent was good. So, the next thing, and I know Tom's with me on this, is you have to expect the unexpected, and we call it be duck-like. You ideally want to just be calm. No matter how much your little feet are paddling underneath the surface, you just want to give this appearance of, I'm calm, I'm in control, because if you panic, everyone that's participating panics. And I know, Tom told me the story of Green River this year, and the what was it? The tents didn't show up or something like that. And so kind of the last minute dealing with it.
Yeah, our tent vendor was a no-show, and that was all our tables and chairs and everything else too.
Yeah, people don't need to sit after 100 miles or after a marathon. Don't worry. Not a big deal. They'll eat off the ground. Yeah, so it's never the thing that you're concerned about that ends up happening. And so the lower picture, I know these photos, these more just prompt the stories, but the lower photo here was, I'm giving the pre-race speech at the Vermont 100 before the 2019 Vermont 100, which was the hottest Vermont 100 on record. It was almost 100 degrees. It was also like almost 100% humidity. Everyone was freaking out. And I could freak out, or I could figure out how to solve the problem. And so, I did a lot of, okay, who can contact all the local businesses to get extra ice? How much ice can we have? Let's have like a polar habitat at our race, right? And then, I had other people reaching out to landowners along the course to see how many people we could convince to just put a hose out for the runners or do something like that so runners could continually cool themselves down. During my pre-race speech, the slogan that I told everyone was, don't be a hero, be a finisher. And the point was, don't go after that PR for the day. Don't be so set in, these are my goals. Instead, if you try for that, you probably will DNF along the way. So instead, think about finishing. But that was one of those things where, just had to fly by the seat of our pants a little bit, but we made it work. The other photo here was my first year race directing Vermont 100. And I'm here huddled with Zeke, who's one of my race committee members, and he kind of manages the trail. And somehow he had gotten a report. It's like Friday afternoon at 3:30, I'm about to do the pre-race speech. Everyone from the town has gone home for the day, and he got a report that there's this like dead rotting deer on the side of the road that all the, it's bad enough that the runners were going to have to like run by it, but it turns out that where it was actually where the runners were like turning off and onto the trail. So I was about to send like 400 runners to hurdle over a rotting deer on the side of the road. Not awesome. And so we were trying to figure out in this moment that happened to be captured, we were trying to figure out how we could get somebody there to take that out, like who do we know that might be okay picking up a deer and have the capability and the truck and everything to get that deer out of there. And, obviously the highway department had gone home for the weekend already, so we couldn't rely on them. So ultimately, crisis averted, but it's never what you expect. And it's like, you can't prepare for what you do when there's a dead rotting deer that has to be removed last minute. Like nobody tells you these things. And, if I worry about that, something else will go wrong next year. So I actually, at this point, I get nervous when things aren't going wrong because you expect that something will. And once it does, you're like, okay, that was the thing. We're good now. But God, I have 1,000 stories of all of the fun adventures behind the scenes, as anybody who's had to direct does. My last race directing lesson, this is a little bit of a shameless plug too, but it takes a village, right, to put on these races. And I think people, runners are actually really very kind when it comes to understanding that it takes a lot of people and thanking volunteers and that sort of thing. But I feel like I can never talk about race directing without talking about all of the people behind the scenes that, make it a success. It's not me, it's all of these people. So we've got a couple of, familiar backs in that upper corner. Yes, that's Tom and Lori's back. And then in the lower one, Dave's the one that's a little further away, but it's Peter Gagarin and Dave Martula. SMAC has traditionally at the Vermont 100 taken on the first aid station at mile 15. Well, the first big aid station at mile 15. But Vermont 100, we have 450 runners, and it takes I buy 500 volunteer shirts. So if that tells you the ratio of, you know, runners to volunteers, it really takes a village. You know, that other photo here is somebody literally putting up all of the glow stick. You know, someone has to mark the course ahead of time. Someone has to unmark the course when you're done. You know, I have a whole race committee behind me. So, so I say that to say thank you to all the volunteers that do all of the work behind the scenes, because a lot of times they make me look a lot better than I am. And also we always need volunteers. So, so consider volunteering and, you know, paying it forward. So cool. That's my, I guess, my nuggets of wisdom, but I'm happy if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm happy to share more stories.
Amy, I just threw one in the chat. What's your most memorable or funny experience from racing a 100?
Funniest or most memorable? Not necessarily the same. Let's see. My most memorable, again, going back to Cascade Crest 100, that race started at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the intent was that everyone would run during the overnight. And towards the end of the race, there's this portion of the course. It's like from mile 65 to mile 85, there's these sharp uphills, like it's like quarter mile of like, you know, hands on knees, hiking up and down or whatever. They're called the cardiac needles because that's, you know, your heart rate jacks right up as you're going up them. And I think I was on the last cardiac needle as the sun was coming up because of the timing of it. So I'm up there as the sun's coming up, and I can't recall if it was Mount Hood or Mount Rainier that you saw, but there's this beautiful view of Mount Rainier or, you know, whatever, and the sun rising, and I'm up there and I'm kind of exhausted, you know, after 85 miles or whatever. But that was one of those moments that, like, I don't think a photo would ever do it justice. And partly because, not only because I was there, but I was also like, it took me 85 miles to get there. So that's one of those moments that like will just always stick out in my head, is this beautiful view that no one else will ever understand and no description will ever do it justice. But like, it was just kind of that perfect moment for a little bit. So that's one of my, I guess, one of my most memorable. Yeah. Funniest might have been when I was finishing my third world championship, and I had a rough day. And I was in France, and I'm careening into the finish. You basically had this 3-mile downhill into the finish. And I was coming down, and there was a bunch of like drunk French guys that were like just hiking down the mountain, you know, like beer, you know, beer cooler on a shoulder or whatever. And they didn't really speak English, but they saw me and saw my USA jersey. And they started singing, like, as best they knew, the Star Spangled Banner, which was like every other word in broken English, like, you know, da da da, can you da da, da, you know. And it was just, I don't know, it was pretty funny and pretty memorable. And, you know, in a way I wish I ran faster, but I also think that that's, again, one of those priceless moments that had I been 5 minutes faster, I never would have encountered these drunk guys that, you know, regaled me with knowing the national anthem and maybe 40% of the words. So what's the one training trip you wish you knew 20 years ago? Oh boy. Huh. I don't know. Can I phone a friend? Like, does someone else want to answer that? I don't know. I think not that it's a training tip, but I think, yeah, it's fine, Barry. I think I wish that like 20 years ago, I think I wish that I had found the sport that I was going to be most passionate about earlier. Like, I was always a runner, but it wasn't until I started doing trails and ultras that I kept the consistency and I kept healthy enough to keep the consistency. Before then, I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do. Oh, you're a runner. Of course, you're going to run a marathon. And then, of course, you're going to BQ, right? Like it was just kind of everyone made these assumptions. And I felt like I had to buy into all those assumptions. So I think I wish, 20 years ago that I had more quickly found where my passion was and not just follow the path that other people seem to think is the path that you're supposed to follow. Running through injuries, Sydney. Oh gosh, we've all done that, right? Patrick. I was gonna say, Patrick, do you want to take this one? I feel like, I don't know, you're more injured than not these days, right?
I went 3 years without an injury, and then I got injured at the Gorge at Pré Gorge, and I was like 100% better day before yesterday, and then yesterday tripped on a rock that was under the snow at Wendell State Forest and set myself back several weeks. Boy. So anyway, I'll be my end now.
Sydney, I at least, when it comes to running through injuries, I think over time you get a better feel of what's a niggle that you can train through versus what's an injury that you need to take time off for. And so developing that sense, I think is, it's a learned skill, but I also think it's such a good, valuable skill to have. But I also, like, personally, I mean, we have a bike trainer in our basement, we have rowers in our basement. And so I probably err a little more on the side of, okay, if something doesn't feel good, maybe we're going to cross train for a day. I think there's a lot of ways to be creative and to keep maintaining fitness without it being running all the time. I mean, the biggest thing that I'm sure you have with the athletes is there are some athletes that just aren't going to tell you that they're injured. And that's sometimes the hardest thing is, just kind of communicating when there's a problem so that you as a coach can adapt things for them. So, do you want me to keep taking questions, Dawn?
Yeah, if you're up for it. Absolutely.
Right. What do you do? Oh, what do you need from crew when running an ultra? Oh boy, everything. I don't know, Sarah, what did I need when you ran with me over the summer?
I don't think I ever know what runners need other than to just kind of be there and go at whatever pace or go with whatever they need at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's different, and the more you run, the more you know. It's just like being a volunteer where, to volunteer at a race, there's the people that know to just hand you a cup, and then there's the people that can really be helpful. When you get to an aid station, you're kind of blank faced and you need someone to say, you need to eat some food, or you need this or whatever. I think that, like Sarah said, the best thing that a crew can do though is really like, they're your voice of reason. And at times they're issuing the tough love. And at times they are, building you up. They have to just kind of sense the moment and sense where you're at, because your emotions go everywhere. The further you're out there, the more you hit the highs and you hit the lows, and you need your crew to just kind of think through all of that and be your brain, really. So, but everybody's different. Cool. What's the distance that you actually realistically need a crew? I personally don't. I'll get them at like the 100K, 100-mile distance, but I mean, like, I have a friend of mine who at Boston Marathon will hand me gels so I don't have to take gels, and that's super helpful because then I don't have to figure out where to put them, and I don't have to worry about chafing with a gel in my pocket and that sort of thing. So I think you never need a crew, and it's all just kind of a personal preference. People at Seven Sisters, you're out there less time than you'd be out there for a marathon. And I still think that, if people have crew that can give them what they want, or to hand off a water bottle quickly so they don't have to sit there and refill, like if that's helpful. And if you're, counting the minutes down to those time pieces, that can be helpful. What am I training for now? Oh, Dave. I'm not entirely sure right now. I have a couple of 100-milers and a couple 100Ks that are on my radar, but I feel like I'm almost as excited about race directing as I am about running races myself these days. So partly I'm working on some fun races this year. So yeah, and hopefully having them happen this year. Yay. Cool. Well, it looks like that's all the questions. Sweet.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amy. Did you have a closing remark?
No, I was just gonna say, thanks for allowing me to just share stories, because anybody that knows me knows I love to talk. But yeah, no, I appreciate sharing my little nuggets with you guys, and being able to see your faces as well. So
yeah, thank you so much. I think this really hit the spot. Thank you for being our speaker today.
For sure.
All right. Well, I guess with that, we can close out the meeting. I'm going to go for a run. Hopefully it's not too gnarly out there. Hopefully you can all get your run or cocoa or whatever floats your boat for the rest of this Sunday. So thank you, SMAC, and see you out there. Bye.